She walked into the lawyer's office to end their marriage, and the moment Silas saw her, every word he'd rehearsed disappeared. 7 months pregnant. His wife, who vanished 8 months ago without a single explanation, was carrying a child. And he had no idea if that child was his. What happened between the night she left and this unbearable moment in a cold office? The truth was about to change everything he thought he knew. Before we begin, I need to tell you something. I created Allure TV especially for those of you who follow me here, and there's content on there that this platform would never allow. Uncensored stories, with no cuts and no ads. You'll find everything: steamy stories, mafia stories, billionaire romances, and many more genres that you're going to love. There's new content every day for you to listen to in multiple languages or read whenever you prefer. This channel no longer generates any revenue for me, but I have an amazing team that works hard every week for all of you. The people who join Allure TV are the ones who keep all of this alive, and they get a lot in return. The link is pinned in the comments, or you can simply point your camera at the QR code on the screen. May God bless each and every one of you, wishing you many blessings in your lives. The office smelled of old paper and stronger coffee than Silas usually allowed himself, and for the first time in months, his hands were not steady. He sat in the leather chair across from his attorney's desk, rehearsing the words he thought he would need. Irreconcilable differences, mutual agreement, no contest. Words that had felt clean and final when he practiced them alone in his car. He believed this morning would be simple. Sign the papers, shake a hand, walk away from 8 months of silence and finally call the chapter closed. Then the door opened, and every rehearsed word evaporated. Olivia stood in the doorway wearing a deep plum dress that draped over the unmistakable curve of her body, one hand resting instinctively on her stomach, as though shielding it from the room, from him, from the weight of the moment itself. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling against her face, and her eyes, the same eyes that used to search his across a dinner table, waiting for him to look up from his phone, now held something guarded, something tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Silas rose halfway from his chair, then stopped, frozen between standing and sitting, between the man he had been and whoever he was about to become in the next 60 seconds. "Olivia," his voice cracked on her name, a name he hadn't said aloud in months. "You're pregnant," she finished for him quietly, without drama, as if she had already said the word to herself 100 times until it stopped hurting to say it. 7 months. The air in the room seemed to thin. Silas felt his pulse in his throat, in his palms, in the sudden ringing silence between them. He did the math without wanting to. 8 months since she left, 7 months pregnant, and the number landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything he thought he understood about his own life. His attorney, a composed woman named Diane who had seen every kind of ugly divorce imaginable, shifted uncomfortably and reached for a folder she suddenly didn't need. "Perhaps we should take a short recess," she offered, but neither Silas nor Olivia seemed to hear her. "Is it—" Silas started, then stopped himself, ashamed of the question, before it even fully left his mouth. He tried again, softer. "Olivia, is the baby—" "Mine," she said, cutting through his hesitation with a calm that felt sharper than anger would have. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, one hand still cradling her stomach, the other folding neatly in her lap. "The baby is mine, Silas. Whether you want to ask if it's yours, that's a different question, and I understand why you'd need to ask it." The words hit him harder than if she had shouted. There was no venom in her voice, only a terrible, quiet honesty, the kind that comes from someone who has already cried every tear they intended to cry over a person and has nothing left to perform. Silas ran a hand through his hair, feeling suddenly like a stranger in his own skin. "I wasn't going to ask that. I would never—" He stopped because he wasn't sure that was true. 8 months was a long time. People changed. People left and found new lives, new beds, new versions of themselves that didn't include the husbands who had failed them. "You don't have to explain," Olivia said. "I didn't come here to make you feel guilty. I came here to end the marriage, the same as you." "Then why didn't you tell me?" The question came out louder than he intended, raw at the edges. 7 months, Olivia. You've been carrying this for 7 months and I didn't know anything. For the first time, something flickered across her face, not anger, but an old, familiar exhaustion, the same look she used to wear on the nights he came home past midnight to find dinner cold on the table and her already asleep, or pretending to be. "Would it have changed anything if you had known?" she asked, and the question hung in the room like smoke that wouldn't clear. "Would you have left the office early? Would you have answered your phone?" Silas had no answer. That was the worst part. He searched himself for a defense, for some proof that he would have shown up differently, and found only silence where certainty should have been. Olivia looked down at her hands, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost gentle, as if she was speaking to the version of Silas she used to love, rather than the one sitting in front of her now. "I didn't leave to punish you," she said. "I left because I couldn't keep disappearing in a marriage where I was already alone." Diane cleared her throat gently, papers still untouched on the desk between them. "Should I give you both a moment?" Neither of them answered. Silas was staring at Olivia, the way a man stares at a house fire he caused and can't put out, and Olivia was staring at some fixed point past his shoulder, as though the wall behind him were easier to look at than the wreckage of what they used to be. "I need to know," Silas said finally, his voice barely above a whisper now, stripped of the composure he'd walked in with. "Not for the papers, not for anything but myself. I need to know if that's my child." Olivia met his eyes then, and for one unguarded second, Silas saw straight through the calm she had built around herself, saw the fear, the exhaustion, the nights she must have spent alone facing something enormous with no one beside her. She opened her mouth to answer, and then she closed it again, her hand tightening slightly over her stomach, as though protecting whatever truth she was about to release into a room that had already broken her once. 8 months earlier, the house on Maple Ridge Lane had still smelled like the candles Olivia loved, vanilla and something floral she could never quite name when Silas asked, back when he still asked things like that. It was a Tuesday evening, unremarkable in every way except that it was the last ordinary evening before everything began to fracture, though neither of them knew it yet. Olivia stood in the kitchen, sleeves pushed up, stirring a pot of the soup Silas used to request during his first year of law school, back when he still had time for things like favorite meals and Tuesday evenings that meant something. She had lit 2 candles on the table, not because it was an anniversary or a birthday, but because she missed him, and lighting candles felt like the only way left to say so without sounding like she was begging. The garage door never opened that night. Instead, her phone buzzed against the counter. "Running late. Big case prep. Don't wait up." She read the message twice, her thumb hovering over the screen, as though a reply might materialize the version of him that used to come home early just to see her face when he walked through the door. She typed nothing back. There was nothing new to say that hadn't already been said in a dozen different ways over the past year. This had not always been their story. Silas had once been the kind of husband who left notes in her coat pockets, who called during lunch just to hear her laugh at something small. Olivia could still remember their wedding day with a clarity that almost hurt. The way he had looked at her like she was the only steady thing in a world that never stopped moving. The way he'd whispered against her ear that he would never let his work matter more than her. But ambition has a quiet way of rewriting promises. It began small. A missed dinner here, a cancelled weekend there. Each excuse reasonable on its own, each apology sincere in the moment it was spoken. Silas was building something, he told her, a future for both of them, a name for himself at the firm that would one day let him breathe easier, be present, be hers in the way he used to be. Olivia believed him, because believing him was easier than accepting what the growing distance actually meant. She tried, in the ways she knew how. She planned a weekend getaway to the coast for their 5th anniversary, only for Silas to cancel 2 hours before their flight because a client needed him. She started leaving him small letters tucked into his briefcase, words she found too vulnerable to say aloud. "I miss the way you used to look at me. I miss us." He never mentioned finding them, and she never asked if he had. One evening, months before the pregnancy, months before Campos du Jordão, months before any of it, Olivia had waited for him at a restaurant they used to love, a reservation for 2 that became a table for 1. She sat through the appetizer, then the entree, refreshing her phone every few minutes, telling the waiter he's on his way until the words felt like a lie, even to her own ears. Silas arrived 90 minutes late, disheveled, apologetic, already halfway to a new excuse before he'd even sat down. "Olivia, I'm sorry. The merger fell through, and I had to—" "You don't have to explain," she had said then too, the same words she would later say in the lawyer's office, though back then they still carried a flicker of hope instead of resignation. "I just wanted one dinner, Silas. One dinner where your phone stays in your pocket." He had reached for her hand across the table, and for a moment she let herself believe things could still shift back into place. "I'll do better," he promised. "I know I keep saying it, but I mean it this time." She wanted so badly to believe him that she nodded, swallowing the doubt threatening to rise in her throat. But better never came. The promises accumulated like unpaid debts, each one a little emptier than the last, until Olivia stopped believing the words the moment they left his mouth. She began preparing herself quietly, without announcement, the way a person braces for weather they can see building on the horizon, even when everyone around them insists the sky looks fine. She stopped waiting up. She stopped setting a plate for him at dinner. She stopped, somewhere along the way, expecting him to notice she had stopped. The truth was, loneliness inside a marriage carved a different kind of ache than loneliness alone ever could, because it came dressed in the illusion of companionship, a ring on her finger, a name shared, a house that looked from the outside like it held a happy life. Olivia used to sit on their porch some evenings watching neighbors return from work to greet spouses at the door and wonder what it might feel like to be seen again by the man she married. That Tuesday night, the soup went cold on the stove. Olivia blew out both candles before eating alone at the table, staring at the empty chair across from her, wondering how many more Tuesdays she had left before something inside her finally broke for good. She didn't yet know that the answer was closer than she thought. One more missed evening, one more broken promise, one more night that would finally push her past the edge of everything she had been willing to forgive. The night everything ended began the same way so many others had, with an empty chair and a phone that stayed silent, long past the hour it should have rung. It was their wedding anniversary. Olivia had marked the date on the calendar weeks in advance, had even mentioned it to Silas twice that month, gently, without pressure, the way she'd learned to bring up anything that mattered to her. "Don't forget the 12th, she'd texted him that morning, adding a small heart, hoping the softness of it might land somewhere in his crowded mind. She spent the afternoon preparing everything herself. A candle-lit dinner, his favorite wine breathing on the counter, a new dress she'd bought weeks ago and saved specifically for this night, a deep wine red that hugged her waist, chosen because she remembered, foolishly perhaps, that red had once been the color he complimented most. She curled her hair, put on the perfume he used to say drove him crazy, and stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing the evening in her mind, allowing herself one more night of hope before hope ran out entirely. 7 o'clock came and went, then 8, then 9. She lit the candles anyway, sitting alone at a table set for two, watching the wax slowly pool and drip down the sides as the night stretched longer than she could bear. Her phone remained silent. No call, no text, no acknowledgement that somewhere across the city someone was supposed to be coming home to her. At 11:30, headlights swept briefly across the living room window, then disappeared. False alarm. Just a neighbor pulling into their own driveway, their own ordinary night intact. By 1 in the morning, Olivia had blown out the candles, changed out of the red dress and curled into bed alone, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside her chest quietly, permanently shift. Silas arrived home at nearly 3, smelling faintly of the office and stale coffee. His tie loosened, his expression already bracing for whatever conversation waited for him. He found Olivia awake, sitting up in bed, the room lit only by the soft glow of a bedside lamp. "Are you still up?" he said, an attempt at casualness that fell flat the instant it left his mouth. "I was waiting for you," Olivia replied, and there was no accusation in her voice, only a flatness that scared him more than anger ever could have. "It's the 12th, Silas." He blinked, and for one unbearable second she watched the realization dawn across his face, the calendar date meaning nothing to him until it was already too late to matter. "Olivia, I'm so sorry, I completely lost track of—" "I know," she said quietly. You always do. I can make it up to you this weekend. We can— Don't! The word cut through the air, not loud, but final. Please don't promise me another weekend, Silas. I don't think I can survive another broken promise. He sat on the edge of the bed, reaching for her hand, but she pulled it gently away, folding both hands in her lap instead, a quiet boundary that spoke louder than any argument could have. I made dinner, she said. I put on the dress you used to love. I sat at that table by myself for 4 hours, Silas, watching candles burn down to nothing, telling myself you'd walk through that door any minute. Her voice remained steady, though her eyes glistened in the lamplight. And somewhere around midnight I stopped waiting for the door to open. I think that's the moment I actually understood. Understood what? That I've been married to your absence for longer than I've been married to you. The words landed between them like something breaking, irreversible, and clean. Silas opened his mouth to respond, to defend, to apologize in whatever form might finally reach her. But nothing came. He had exhausted his apologies months ago, spent them so freely they'd lost all currency, and both of them knew it. Olivia turned off the lamp and lay down with her back to him, and Silas sat in the darkness beside her, feeling for the first time the full weight of everything he had let slip through his hands while chasing something he could no longer even name. 3 weeks later, while he was away at a conference he'd extended twice without asking, Olivia packed 2 suitcases with quiet efficiency, taking only what felt truly hers: clothes, a few books, the photograph of her mother from the nightstand. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, centered carefully in a small pool of afternoon light, a silent explanation that required no letter to accompany it. She did not call anyone to say goodbye. She simply left, closing the door behind her, with a softness that somehow felt louder than any slammed door ever could. 3 weeks after that, standing in a small bathroom in a rented apartment 2 cities away, Olivia stared at 2 pink lines on a test she'd bought almost as an afterthought, her hands trembling around the edges of a truth that would reshape everything that came next. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bathtub, one hand pressed against her still flat stomach, and made a decision in that quiet, trembling moment that she would carry alone for the next 7 months. A decision born not from spite, but from a certainty she couldn't yet fully explain even to herself. He would never choose this. He would never choose us. She would raise this child on her own terms, in her own time, without asking a man who had already shown her, over and over, exactly where his priorities lived. Back in the present, the office had grown unbearably quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the ribs and makes breathing feel deliberate. Diane had long since stopped pretending to organize papers, sensing that whatever was unfolding between her clients mattered more than any document on her desk. Olivia's hand remained pressed against her stomach, and Silas remained frozen in his chair, waiting for an answer that felt like it was taking a lifetime to arrive. "Olivia," he said again, softer this time, stripped of any lawyer-rehearsed composure. "Please, I need to know." She exhaled slowly, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried none of the guardedness from moments before, only a tired, unflinching honesty that had clearly been waiting 7 months to be released. "Yes, Silas. The baby is yours." The words hit him like something physical, a wave that knocked the air from his chest. He sat back in his chair, running both hands over his face, torn between overwhelming relief and a grief so sharp it nearly doubled him over. Relief that the child was his, and grief for every single day of the pregnancy he had already missed without knowing it existed. "Then why—" His voice broke. He tried again. "Why didn't you tell me? Olivia, I had a right to know. I could have—" "Could have what?" Olivia interrupted. And this time there was an edge beneath the calm 7 months of restraint finally cracking open. "Rearranged your schedule? Left the office early a few times? Silas? I spent our entire marriage hoping you'd choose me over your work, and you never did. What made you think you'd choose a baby you didn't even know you had? That's not fair, isn't it?" She shook her head slowly, her eyes glassy but her voice steady. "You forgot our anniversary. You cancelled our trip to the coast. You came home at 3 in the morning while I sat alone with cold soup and dead candles more times than I can count. I don't say this to hurt you. I say it because it's the truth you need to hear. Silas said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like the same empty promises he'd offered 100 times before. I thought about telling you, Olivia continued, quieter now, some of the fire fading into something more vulnerable. For weeks, I thought about calling, about showing up at your office, about 1,000 different ways to say the words, but every time I imagined how you'd react, the confusion, maybe the guilt, maybe even the obligation, and I couldn't do it, Silas. I couldn't bring a child into a family built on obligation instead of love. You don't know that's how I would have reacted, Silas said, his voice thick. You didn't give me the chance to prove you wrong. You're right, Olivia admitted, surprising him. I didn't, because I was scared, and because I was tired, and because after everything I genuinely believed I was protecting both of us. Protecting this baby from growing up feeling like an inconvenience you tolerated instead of a child you chose. Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his composed exterior completely dissolved now. Olivia, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted, but unwavering. I know I don't deserve the benefit of the doubt. I know every excuse I could offer would sound exactly like the excuses that drove you away in the first place, but I need you to hear this. I would have wanted this baby. I would have wanted you. I was too blind and too selfish to show it when it mattered, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting that. But don't mistake my failures as a husband for what I would have been as a father. Olivia's composure wavered, just slightly, a tremor passing across her features before she steadied herself again. Words are easy, Silas. You were always good with words. It was everything else you struggled with. Then let me show you, he said, an urgency rising in his voice that hadn't been there in years, maybe not since the earliest days of their marriage. Not with words, with actions. Give me the chance to prove that the man who let you sit alone with cold soup isn't the same man who's sitting in front of you right now begging for a chance to be better. Diane, still present but increasingly invisible in the emotional weight of the room, finally spoke. Given the circumstances, perhaps it would be wise to pause the proceedings today. There's clearly a great deal to discuss outside the scope of the divorce filing. Olivia nodded slowly, her hand still resting protectively over her stomach, as though shielding the child from the intensity of everything unfolding around them. She rose from her chair, gathering her purse with hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts to appear composed. I need time, she said finally, looking at Silas with an expression that held equal parts exhaustion and something else, something neither anger nor forgiveness, but the fragile, uncertain space between the two. Not to reconsider the divorce. That decision hasn't changed, but time to think about what your place in this child's life should look like. That's all I'm asking for, Silas said, standing as well, careful not to move too close, sensing the invisible boundary she had drawn around herself. Just the chance to show you I've changed, not for the marriage, for our child, for the family I should have fought harder to keep. Olivia paused at the doorway, her hand resting briefly on the frame, and for one unguarded moment Silas saw something flicker across her face. Not quite hope, but perhaps the ghost of it, waiting cautiously in the wings. I'll be in touch, she said, and then she was gone, leaving Silas standing alone in an office that suddenly felt far too large, holding a truth that had rearranged the entire architecture of his future in the span of a single conversation. He didn't yet know where she had gone, where she was living, or how she had survived 7 months of pregnancy entirely alone. But as he stood there, something solidified inside him, a resolve sharper and more certain than anything he'd felt in years. He would find her, and this time no case, no deadline, no version of his old life would stop him. Silas spent the 3 days following that meeting in a strange, disorienting fog, going through the motions of his life while his mind remained fixed on a single image. Olivia's hand resting over her stomach, her eyes glassy but unwavering as she told him the truth he'd been too afraid to ask for months. He cancelled 2 meetings that week. His assistant, Marissa, who had worked alongside him for nearly 6 years, noticed the change immediately, but said nothing beyond a raised eyebrow and a quiet, "Everything all right, Mr. Whitfield?" Silas gave her a distracted nod that satisfied neither of them. On the 4th day, he called Diane, his voice steadier than he felt. I need to speak with Olivia again. Not about the divorce paperwork, about the baby. She's requested we handle communication through the firm for now, Diane replied carefully. I can pass along a message. Tell her I'd like to meet, just to talk. No pressure, no papers, nothing about reconciliation if she doesn't want that conversation. He paused, running a hand through his hair. Tell her I just want to understand what she needs from me. 2 days later, Diane called back with an address and a time. A small cafe near the edge of downtown, neutral ground, Olivia's choice entirely. Silas arrived 20 minutes early, something he hadn't done for anything unrelated to work in longer than he cared to admit. He chose a table near the window, ordered nothing, and watched the door with an intensity that made the barista glance at him twice. When Olivia walked in, she wore a soft yellow cardigan over a simple dress, her pregnancy more visible now than it had seemed in the office, or perhaps he was simply seeing her more clearly. She moved carefully, one hand occasionally drifting to the small of her back, and Silas felt a fresh wave of guilt at not knowing whether that ache was normal or something requiring attention. He realized, with a quiet horror, that he didn't know the first thing about what her body was going through. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat down across from him, declining the coffee he offered to order for her. "I said I'd think about your place in the baby's life. That's not the same as saying I've decided anything," Olivia replied, her tone measured, protective. "I understand." Silas folded his hands on the table, forcing himself to slow down, to resist the urge to fill silence with promises she had every reason not to believe. "I'm not here to convince you of anything today. I just want to ask what you need, medically, financially, in any way. I want to know how I can help, even if you're not ready to let me be present." Something in Olivia's expression softened slightly, surprise flickering behind her caution. "That's different from what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" "Promises, grand declarations." She shrugged faintly. The old Silas would have shown up with flowers and a speech, tried to fix everything in one conversation. "The old Silas made a lot of speeches," he admitted, "and not nearly enough changes to back them up. I'm trying not to be him anymore." Olivia studied him for a long moment, as though searching for the performance beneath his words, and finding, to her visible confusion, something that resembled sincerity instead. "I don't need financial help," she said finally. "I've been managing. I have savings, and I picked up freelance design work these past few months." "Where are you living?" Silas asked gently. "Diane mentioned you'd moved, but not where." Olivia hesitated, and for a moment Silas thought she might refuse to answer. "Campos do Jordão," she said eventually. "A small house, quiet. It felt like the right place to figure things out." Silas nodded slowly, filing the information away, careful not to let his expression reveal how desperately he wanted to ask more, to ask if she was safe, if she was eating enough, if the mountain air was too cold for her at night, if she had anyone checking on her at all. But he sensed pushing further would close the fragile door she'd just barely opened. "I'm not asking you to let me move in, or to come back," he said instead. "I know that's not something words can fix, but I'd like to be involved, even in small ways. I'd like to know how the pregnancy is going. I'd like to help however you'll let me, even if that's just from a distance for now." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of the water glass in front of her. "You hurt me for a long time, Silas. Not in one big moment, but slowly, in 100 small ones. I can't just erase that because you're saying the right things in a coffee shop." "I'm not asking you to erase it," Silas said, his voice thick with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, genuine humility. "I'm asking for the chance to prove, over time, through actions and not words, that I understand what I lost, and what I still might be able to save, even if it's not the marriage." Olivia's eyes glistened, though she blinked the emotion back before it could fall. "If I let you be part of this, of the baby's life, it has to be real, Silas. Consistent. Not grand gestures followed by disappearing again the moment work gets demanding. I understand. I don't think you do. Not yet." She met his eyes fully then, something firm and unwavering settling into her expression. "But I'm willing to let you try. Not because I trust you, because our child deserves the chance to know his father, if his father is actually willing to show up." Silas felt something crack open in his chest. Not quite relief, but the first fragile foundation of hope he'd allowed himself since walking into that office days earlier. "Then let me start proving it," he said. "Today. However small. Tell me what you need and I'll be there." Olivia studied him a moment longer, as though weighing the cost of hope against the safety of expecting nothing at all. Finally, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small notepad, writing something down before sliding it across the table toward him. An address. Her address, in Campos do Jordão. "The nursery still needs work," she said quietly. "If you're serious about showing up, that's where you'll need to start." The drive to Campos do Jordão took nearly 4 hours, winding through roads that climbed steadily into cooler air and thicker forest, and Silas spent every mile of it rehearsing what he would say when he arrived, only to abandon each version somewhere around the halfway point, realizing that Olivia was right. Words had never been the problem. It was time to let actions speak instead. He arrived just past noon on a Saturday, his car packed with tools he wasn't entirely sure how to use. A folded slip of paper with her address creased soft from handling. The house came into view slowly as he navigated the narrow mountain road, small, wooden, with a sloped roof and a porch that clearly needed repair, tucked among pines that swayed gently in the cool afternoon breeze. It looked nothing like the modern apartment they'd shared in the city, and everything like a place someone chose deliberately to disappear into, to heal in private. Olivia opened the door before he even reached it, evidently having heard the car pull up the gravel drive. She wore a deep burgundy sweater that made her look softer than he remembered, her hair loose around her shoulders, one hand instinctively resting on her rounded stomach as she took in the sight of him standing on her porch with a toolbox in hand. "You actually came," she said, something between surprise and cautious approval in her voice. "I said I would." Silas glanced past her shoulder into the modest living room, noting the stack of unopened boxes in the corner, the single lamp illuminating a space that felt warm but incomplete, like a life still being assembled piece by piece. "I brought tools. I wasn't sure exactly what you needed, so I brought everything I could think of." Olivia stepped aside to let him in, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "The nursery's this way." She led him down a short hallway to a room bathed in soft afternoon light, empty except for a disassembled crib still in its box, propped against the wall, and a few cans of paint stacked beside a window that overlooked the pine forest beyond. The walls were bare, unpainted, waiting. "I kept meaning to put it together," Olivia admitted, wrapping her arms loosely around herself. "But every time I tried lifting the box, I remembered I probably shouldn't be doing that alone right now." Silas felt something tighten in his chest at the thought of her attempting to assemble a crib by herself, 7 months pregnant, with no one to help lift the heavier pieces. "You should have called someone, a neighbor, a friend." "I didn't want anyone to know yet," she said simply, cutting off the thought before it fully formed. "It felt easier to keep it quiet until I figured out what I was doing." He nodded, understanding more than he let on, and knelt down beside the box without another word, pulling out the instruction manual and beginning to sort through the pieces methodically. Olivia lowered herself carefully into an old rocking chair in the corner, watching him work in silence for a long while. The only sounds the soft scrape of wood against wood and the occasional rustle of pine branches outside the window. "You're quiet," she observed eventually. "I'm concentrating," Silas replied, holding up 2 identical-looking pieces of wood with visible confusion. "This is more complicated than closing a merger." A small, unexpected laugh escaped her, quickly suppressed but not quick enough for Silas to miss it. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh in nearly a year, and something in his chest ached at how much he had missed that particular sound. "You've never done this kind of thing before, have you?" she asked, watching him struggle with a set of screws. "Not once," he admitted, glancing up at her with something almost sheepish in his expression. "I spent our entire marriage hiring people to fix things instead of learning to fix them myself. I think that says something about who I used to be." Olivia said nothing, but her silence felt different now, less guarded, as though she were allowing herself to simply observe him without immediately searching for the catch. Over the next several hours, Silas worked through the crib piece by piece, occasionally consulting the manual. occasionally cursing quietly under his breath when a screw refused to align. Olivia offered guidance from the rocking chair, pointing out mistakes, correcting his approach, and slowly, without either of them announcing it, an easy rhythm began to settle between them. Not the rhythm of a married couple, not yet, but something gentler, more careful, built on small moments instead of grand declarations. By early evening, the crib stood assembled in the corner of the room, slightly crooked on one side, but standing nonetheless. Silas stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead, surveying his work with a strange, unfamiliar sense of pride. "It's not perfect," he said. "It's better than the box it came in," Olivia replied, pushing herself up from the rocking chair to inspect it more closely. She ran her hand along the smooth wooden rail, and for a moment something vulnerable crossed her face. The reality of the baby's arrival suddenly more tangible now that there was a crib waiting to hold him. "I noticed the porch step outside is loose too," Silas said, watching her carefully. "And one of your kitchen cabinet doors isn't hanging right. I can fix those before I head back tonight, if you'll let me." Olivia turned to look at him, studying his face for a long moment, searching for the exhaustion or impatience that would have signaled the old Silas, eager to finish a task and move on to something more important. She found none of it. "All right," she said finally, quietly. "You can stay and fix what needs fixing." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to trust rebuilt. But it was, Silas realized as he gathered his tools and headed toward the porch, the first door she had opened to him in 8 months. And he intended to walk through every single one she gave him, no matter how small, no matter how long it took to earn the next. As the sun began sinking behind the pine-covered mountains, casting the small house in warm amber light, Olivia stood in the doorway watching him work on the porch step, her hand resting on her stomach, feeling something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Hope, cautious and fragile, beginning to stir. The weekends became a quiet ritual neither of them spoke about directly, as though naming it might frighten it away. Silas made the 4-hour drive to Campos do Jordão every Friday evening, arriving just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, and stayed until Sunday afternoon, when he reluctantly returned to a city that felt increasingly foreign to him, an old life he was slowly outgrowing without quite realizing it. By the third weekend, Olivia had stopped feigning surprise when his car pulled into the gravel drive. By the fourth, she had started leaving the porch light on for him. "You're early," she said one Friday evening, opening the door to find him standing there with grocery bags in hand, instead of tools this time. "I read that you're supposed to eat more iron-rich foods in the 3rd trimester, he said, a little awkwardly, setting the bags down on the kitchen counter. "I wasn't sure what that meant exactly, so I bought a little of everything the store recommended." Olivia peered into the bags, discovering spinach, lentils, lean cuts of meat, and an assortment of foods that suggested he had in fact researched this rather thoroughly. "You've been reading pregnancy books?" "Articles, mostly," Silas admitted, a faint flush rising in his cheeks. "And I bought 2 books. I didn't want to show up not knowing anything." Something in Olivia's chest loosened slightly at the admission, not because the gesture itself was extraordinary, but because of what it represented. A man who had once forgotten anniversaries now memorizing trimester nutrition guidelines in quiet hotel rooms between depositions. That evening, as Olivia prepared dinner with the ingredients he'd brought, Silas sat at the small kitchen table, watching her move carefully around the space, one hand occasionally pressing against her lower back. "Does it hurt?" he asked, unable to keep the concern from his voice. "Just the usual aches," she said, offering a reassuring smile that didn't entirely erase the worry on his face. "3rd trimester isn't exactly comfortable, but it's normal." "Can I do anything?" Olivia paused, considering the question longer than seemed necessary for something so simple. "You could rub my feet later," she said finally, almost testing the words, watching for his reaction. "They swell up something terrible by the end of the day." Silas didn't hesitate. "Of course." Later that evening, sitting on the small living room sofa with Olivia's feet resting in his lap, Silas worked his thumbs gently along the arch of her foot, watching the tension slowly leave her body as she sank deeper into the cushions, eyes closed, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "This is strange," she murmured, eyes still closed. "Good strange or bad strange?" "I don't know yet," she admitted honestly. "I spent so long being angry at you that I forgot what it felt like to just exist near you, without bracing for disappointment. Silas's hands stilled for a moment, absorbing the weight of her words. "I know I don't deserve this chance," he said quietly. "The foot rubs, the weekends, any of it. But I'm grateful for every piece of it you're willing to give me." Olivia opened her eyes, studying him in the soft lamplight. "Why now, Silas? Really, what changed?" He considered the question carefully, unwilling to offer another easy answer she'd heard too many times before. "Sitting in that office, hearing you say you were 7 months pregnant, and realizing I'd missed all of it. The first time you felt sick in the morning, the first time you heard the heartbeat, all of it. Something broke open in me. I finally understood that I'd been mistaking busyness for importance my entire career. That I'd convinced myself that providing meant more than being present, when really, presence was the only thing that ever actually mattered to you." The following weekend, as Olivia sat curled on the couch reading, she gasped softly, one hand flying to her stomach. Silas was at her side instantly, kneeling beside the couch, alarm written across his face. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "He's kicking," Olivia said, a smile breaking across her face despite the earlier gasp of surprise. "Really kicking for the first time here?" She reached for his hand instinctively, guiding it gently to the side of her stomach before catching herself, hesitating. "Can I?" Silas asked softly, respecting the boundary even as his hand hovered inches away. Olivia nodded and he pressed his palm gently against the warm curve of her stomach, waiting, breath held. A moment later he felt it, a small, insistent flutter against his hand, unmistakably alive, unmistakably real. Silas's eyes filled with tears he made no attempt to hide, something profound shifting inside him as he knelt there, feeling his child move for the first time. "That's—" His voice broke entirely. "Olivia, that's incredible." She watched him, moved despite herself by the raw emotion on his face, so different from the composed, distant man who used to disappear behind stacks of paperwork every evening. "He does that a lot in the evenings," she said softly, "especially when it's quiet. I want to feel this every day," Silas admitted, still kneeling, his hand still resting against her stomach. "I don't want to keep missing these moments, Olivia. I know I have no right to ask for more than you're already giving, but I need you to know how much this matters to me." Olivia said nothing for a long moment, watching him kneel there with tears in his eyes, feeling something shift cautiously within her own guarded heart. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the earliest seed of something that might one day grow into it. "Come back next weekend," she said finally quietly. "There's a lot more he'll do before he's born. I don't want you to miss it either." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even close. But as Silas drove back to the city late that night, his hand still tingling faintly with the memory of his son's first kick against his palm, he understood that something fundamental had shifted between them. A door pushed open just a little wider, an invitation extended just a little further. He had no idea that in 2 weeks' time, an ultrasound appointment would offer them both a glimpse of something that would change everything even further. The waiting room at Dr. Alameda's clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh coffee, its walls lined with soft watercolor paintings meant to ease the nerves of expectant parents. Silas sat beside Olivia, his knee bouncing slightly with a nervous energy he couldn't quite suppress, while she flipped absently through a parenting magazine she wasn't actually reading. "You don't have to be nervous," Olivia said, glancing sideways at him with the faintest hint of amusement. "It's just an ultrasound." "The morphological one, though," Silas replied. "The one where we see his face for the first time. I might be a little nervous." Olivia's magazine lowered slightly, something soft crossing her expression. "I didn't expect you to know the difference between ultrasound types." "I told you I've been reading," Silas said, offering a small, self-deprecating smile. "Turns out fatherhood requires homework I never bothered doing the first time around, since I wasn't around for much of anything." Before Olivia could respond, a nurse called her name, and they were led back to a dim examination room, Olivia settling onto the table, while Silas hovered uncertainly near the door, unsure whether his presence in this deeply intimate space was welcome or overstepping. "You can sit," Olivia said, nodding toward the chair positioned beside the examination table, and something in Silas's chest eased at the invitation. "Doctor, Alameda entered moments later, warm and efficient, squeezing gel onto Olivia's stomach before pressing the ultrasound wand against her skin. The screen beside them flickered to life, grainy shapes slowly resolving into something unmistakably, achingly human. "There he is," the doctor said, adjusting the wand slightly. "Let's see if we can get a good look at that face." Silas leaned forward, breath caught in his throat, watching as the image sharpened into the unmistakable curve of a tiny nose, the delicate outline of closed eyes, small hands curled near a face that somehow, impossibly, seemed to carry traces of them both. "Oh," Olivia breathed, her hand finding Silas's without seeming to notice she'd done it, gripping tightly as tears welled in her eyes. "Silas, look at him." "I'm looking," Silas said, his own voice thick with emotion, his fingers instinctively tightening around hers. "He's beautiful, Olivia. He's absolutely beautiful." The doctor pointed out small details as she continued the examination. The steady rhythm of the heartbeat, the curl of tiny fingers, the profile that seemed to shift and settle with each small movement. And Silas found himself entirely undone by each new detail, tears slipping freely down his face without any attempt to hide them. "Everything looks perfectly healthy," Dr. Alameda confirmed eventually, wiping the gel from Olivia's stomach and offering them both a warm smile. "Strong heartbeat, good growth, everything exactly where it should be at this stage." As the doctor stepped out to allow them a moment, Olivia remained on the table, staring at the now frozen image on the screen, her hand still loosely intertwined with Silas's. "We should decide on a name," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Do you have one in mind?" Silas asked carefully, aware that this decision, more than almost anything else, belonged primarily to her. Olivia considered for a long moment. "My grandfather's name was Pedro. He was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I mattered growing up. I always thought if I had a son, I'd want to carry his name forward somehow." "Pedro," Silas repeated softly, testing the weight of it. "I like that. What about a middle name?" "What about Lucas?" Olivia offered, watching him carefully. "It means light in Latin. After everything that's happened this year, it feels fitting." "Pedro Lucas," Silas said, a smile breaking across his face despite the tears still drying on his cheeks. "It's perfect, Olivia, truly." They sat together for a long moment, in comfortable silence, both staring at the small printed photograph the nurse had handed them on the way out, the first physical proof of the son who would soon join them. "Can I ask you something?" Silas said eventually, as they walked slowly toward the parking lot afterward, matching his pace carefully to hers. "Of course. Do you think there's any chance—" He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't push too hard against the fragile progress they'd built. "Any chance that someday you might be able to forgive me? Not for the marriage necessarily. Just for me, as a person." Olivia stopped walking, turning to face him fully in the soft afternoon light of the parking lot, her expression thoughtful rather than guarded for the first time in longer than either of them could remember. "I don't know if I'm ready to answer that yet," she admitted honestly, "but I will say this. 6 weeks ago, I couldn't have imagined sitting beside you in that room, holding your hand while we watched our son's face appear on a screen. And yet, that's exactly what just happened." "That's not a no," Silas said carefully, hope flickering cautiously in his chest. "It's not a no," Olivia agreed, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her guarded exterior. "But it's not a yes either, Silas. I need you to understand that whatever happens between us, it has to happen slowly. Real trust doesn't rebuild itself in 6 weeks, no matter how many cribs you assemble or foot rubs you offer." "I understand," Silas said, and he meant it fully, without the desperate urgency that had colored his earlier promises. "I'm not asking you to rush anything. I just needed to know if the door was still open, even slightly." Olivia studied him for a long moment, the ultrasound photo held gently between them, evidence of the small life that had already begun rewriting both their futures. "It's open," she said finally, quietly. "Just don't expect me to walk through it quickly." As they reached the car, Olivia paused once more, glancing down at the small photograph in her hand, before looking back up at Silas with an expression he hadn't seen directed at him in over a year, something that resembled, however cautiously, genuine warmth. "Thank you for being there today," she said softly. "It meant more than you probably realize." Silas opened the car door for her, his heart fuller than it had been in longer than he could remember, though he knew better than to let himself believe the hardest parts were already behind them. Pedro Lucas was still 2 months away from arriving, and Silas understood with quiet certainty that the truest test of everything he was building with Olivia still lay ahead. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks earlier than anyone had expected. Silas was in the middle of reviewing a contract at his office when his phone buzzed against the desk, Olivia's name flashing across the screen in a way that immediately sent his pulse racing. She rarely called him outside their scheduled weekend visits, preferring texts for anything routine. "Olivia?" "Silas." Her voice was tight, controlled in the way people sound when they're trying very hard not to panic. "My water broke. I think this is happening now." Silas was already on his feet, grabbing his keys, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Now it's not supposed to be for another 3 weeks. "Babies don't always follow schedules," Olivia said, a strained attempt at humor cutting through the fear in her voice. "The contractions are close together already. I called an ambulance. They're taking me to the hospital in Campos de Jordão." "I'm coming," Silas said, already halfway to the elevator, abandoning the contract on his desk without a second thought. "I'm coming right now, Olivia. Don't be scared. I'll be there." "Silas, it's a 4-hour drive." "Then I'd better start driving," he said, already pushing through the lobby doors into the evening air. "I love you. I love him. I love Pedro. I'm coming." The drive felt endless, every red light an agony, every slow driver ahead of him a personal torment. Silas called the hospital twice for updates, spoke briefly with a nurse who assured him Olivia was progressing but stable, and pressed his foot harder against the accelerator than he'd ever allowed himself on that winding mountain road. He arrived at the hospital just after midnight, breathless, hair disheveled, still wearing his work clothes from that morning. A nurse guided him quickly toward the maternity ward, where he found Olivia mid-contraction, her face flushed and damp with sweat, gripping the bed rail with white-knuckled intensity. "You made it," she gasped between breaths, relief flooding her expression despite the pain etched across her features. "I told you I would." Silas moved immediately to her side, taking her hand, ignoring the discomfort of her grip tightening painfully around his fingers. "I'm here, Olivia. I'm not going anywhere." The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of contractions, encouraging words from the medical staff, and Silas's constant, steady presence beside her, wiping sweat from her forehead, offering ice chips, murmuring encouragement whenever her strength seemed to waver. "I can't do this," Olivia gasped at one particularly difficult point, exhaustion overwhelming her features. "Silas, I don't think I can do this." "Yes, you can," he said firmly, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "You've done every hard thing alone for 7 months, Olivia. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You can do this last part too, and this time, you don't have to do it alone." Something in his voice, steady and certain in a way she'd rarely heard from him, seemed to anchor her through the next wave of pain, and she nodded, gathering strength she didn't know she still had. Dawn was beginning to break outside the hospital window, when the doctor finally announced it was time to push, and the next 20 minutes passed in a blur of intensity that left Silas simultaneously terrified and awestruck by the sheer force of what Olivia's body was accomplishing, and then suddenly, impossibly, a small furious cry filled the room. "He's here!" the doctor announced, lifting a tiny, wriggling form into view. A healthy baby boy. Silas felt his knees nearly buckle, tears streaming freely down his face, as the nurses cleaned and wrapped the baby before placing him gently against Olivia's chest. She let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, staring down at their son with an expression of pure, overwhelming love. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Silas, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." Silas leaned close, gazing down at the small red face of his son. Tiny fingers curled instinctively around Olivia's finger, and felt something inside him shift permanently, irrevocably, into a new shape he would carry for the rest of his life. "Pedro Lucas," he murmured, reaching out hesitantly to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. "Welcome to the world." Olivia glanced up at him, exhausted but glowing, watching the raw emotion play across his face without any of the guardedness she usually maintained. "Do you want to hold him?" Silas's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "He's your son too," she said softly. "Of course I'm sure." Olivia carefully transferred the baby into Silas's arms, and he cradled Pedro Lucas with a tenderness that surprised even himself, staring down at the small face already looking remarkably alert despite having just entered the world moments before. "I promise you," Silas whispered, his voice cracking with emotion as he gazed down at his son. "I will never let you feel like you're less important than anything else in my life. Not work, not ambition, not anything. You will always come first. Always." Olivia watched him make this promise to their newborn son, tears sliding silently down her own cheeks, and felt something loosen in her chest that had remained tightly guarded for the better part of a year. Not full forgiveness, not yet, but something adjacent to it, something that felt for the first time in a long time like genuine hope. "He has your eyes," she said softly, watching Silas hold their son. "He has your strength," Silas replied, glancing up at her with an expression of such profound gratitude that Olivia felt her own breath catch. "Thank you, Olivia. For him. For letting me be here. For everything." Outside the hospital window, the first light of dawn spread slowly across the mountains surrounding Campos de Jordão, gilding the pine trees in soft gold, marking the beginning of a day that neither of them would ever forget. The day their family, broken and rebuilt in equal measure, truly began. But as Silas held his son for the first time, a quiet question lingered beneath his joy, one he wasn't yet ready to voice aloud. Now that Pedro Lucas had arrived, what would become of him and Olivia? Would this shared love for their child be enough to bridge everything that still stood unresolved between them? 2 weeks after Pedro Lucas came into the world, Silas found himself standing on the porch of the small house in Campos de Jordão, watching the mountain mist curl low over the pine trees. In the early morning light, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Inside he could hear the soft, contented sounds of Olivia humming to the baby, a melody he didn't recognize but found himself already memorizing. He had taken an indefinite leave from the firm, a decision that would have been unthinkable to him a year ago, back when identity and ambition had felt like the same word. Now standing on this porch, watching morning light spread slowly across a landscape utterly unlike the city skyline he'd spent his career chasing, Silas understood that he'd been measuring success by the wrong metrics his entire adult life. Olivia appeared in the doorway behind him, Pedro Lucas cradled against her shoulder, freshly fed and drowsy. "You're up early," she said, settling into the chair beside him, the baby's small fist curling instinctively around a strand of her hair. "Couldn't sleep," Silas admitted, reaching over to gently stroke his son's back. "Kept thinking about everything that's happened this year. It still doesn't feel entirely real some mornings." "Which part?" Olivia asked, a small smile playing at her lips. "The divorce, the reconciliation attempts, or the crooked crib you built?" Silas laughed, the sound easy and unguarded in a way it rarely used to be. "All of it, honestly. Especially the part where I somehow became the kind of man who reads parenting books and knows the difference between ultrasound types." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the mist slowly lift off the mountains, Pedro Lucas making small sleepy sounds against his mother's shoulder. "I've been thinking about something," Olivia said eventually, her voice more serious now. "About us. About what happens next." Silas turned to face her fully, his chest tightening with a familiar mixture of hope and fear. "I'm listening." "I'm not going to pretend the divorce papers don't still exist," she said carefully. "What we had, the marriage we built and lost, that version of us isn't coming back. I don't think it should. That marriage was built on old patterns, old imbalances, and I don't want to simply return to what we were." Silas nodded slowly, understanding the weight beneath her words, bracing himself for whatever came next. "But," Olivia continued, watching him carefully, "I've watched you these past 2 months, Silas. I've watched you show up every single weekend without fail. I've watched you learn how to fold laundry properly and how to soothe a crying baby at 3 in the morning. I've watched you choose presence over ambition again and again, without me ever having to ask twice." "I meant every bit of it," Silas said quietly. "I know," Olivia replied, something warm entering her voice for the first time in longer than either of them could remember. "That's exactly why I've been thinking maybe we don't need to rebuild the old marriage. Maybe we build something entirely new instead, something based on who we actually are now, not who we used to pretend to be." Silas felt his heart rate quicken, hardly daring to hope he understood her correctly. "What are you saying, Olivia?" "I'm saying I'd like you to consider staying," she said, her eyes meeting his steadily. "Not because the divorce paperwork demands it, and not because Pedro needs both parents under one roof necessarily, but because I think, for the first time in a long time, I actually want you here. Not the version of you that used to disappear behind deadlines. This version, the one who shows up." Silas reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "I would like nothing more," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need you to know something, Olivia. This isn't about rebuilding what we lost. You're right, that version of us needs to stay in the past. If you'll have me, I want to build something new alongside you. A partnership based on respect, on presence, on actually choosing each other every single day, instead of assuming love alone would carry us through." Olivia smiled then, fully and freely, the kind of smile Silas hadn't seen directed at him in over a year, and something in his chest finally, completely settled into place. Months later, the small house in Campos de Jordão had transformed into something that felt unmistakably like home. Toys scattered across the living room floor, a proper nursery painted in warm, gentle tones, and a porch swing Silas had built himself, slightly crooked but sturdy, where the three of them spent countless evenings watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. Silas had opened a small legal consulting practice in the nearby town, choosing quality over quantity, presence over prestige, learning to measure his days not by billable hours, but by moments spent watching his son take wobbling first steps across the living room floor. Olivia's design business flourished from the quiet studio she'd built in the spare room, and in the evenings, she and Silas would sit together on the porch, Pedro Lucas between them, watching the sky shift into deep shades of amber and rose, no longer strangers rebuilding a broken past, but partners choosing deliberately and daily to build something real. Silas had learned, finally and irrevocably, that success had never lived in boardrooms or billable hours. It lived here on this porch, in the small hand curled around his finger, and the woman beside him who had taught him, through patience and quiet strength, exactly what it meant to truly come home. Silas learned too late that presence is the truest form of love, but not too late to change. Sometimes the family we almost lost becomes the one that finally teaches us how to stay. Have you ever imagined having access to amazing stories every day of the week? What would you have chosen? Exactly the way you've always wanted. With no ads interrupting the best parts, no cuts, and no censorship? On Allure TV, that's exactly what you'll find. Choose from a wide variety of genres based on your mood: passionate romances, billionaire stories, mafia romances, second chance love stories, forbidden love, and much more. Every day, new content is waiting for you. And the best part? You can listen in the language you prefer or read whenever you want. Create your own playlist and binge the stories you love most, in any order, anytime you like. No ads, no interruptions. Just you and the story. The link is pinned in the comments, or simply point your camera at the QR code on the screen. Access it now.